I want to welcome everybody to the Futures Forum on Learning series. I just ask everyone to join on mute, and we're going to get started in just a minute. We're just letting in our guests, and we've got an amazing program ahead. Let me introduce myself. My name is Kumar Garg. I'm the Managing Director of Schmidt Futures, and this is the third Futures Forum on Learning series that we're doing. We've had two before this, one focused on the important role that adult learning is going to play as the world economy shifts due to COVID, and the second one on the changing role of assessments as COVID has caused a huge disruption. And the theme of this third conversation is on accelerated learning, given the huge learning gaps that have arisen both in the United States and around the world. But just to give people a little bit of context and just to introduce everybody, we'd love, and we've done this in the previous two sessions, to have folks introduce themselves in the chat. So name, organization, and something you'd love to learn today. And just to also tell everybody that we'll be recording this session. This is a global forum, but not every time works for everybody. Luckily, our keynote is making time available, even though it's pretty late in India where he's based. But we're going to be recording the session and making it available to all to be able to get the benefit of it. And, just to give folks a little bit of context on what brought this forum forward. So the first Futures Forum on Learning actually happened a year ago. We did it last summer, just as more than 1 billion students around the world were suddenly out of school because of COVID. And it raised, as there was a huge surge in online learning, it raised just a series of questions around what is going to be the new educational system that we're going to be working through, both on what does digital learning need to look like, but also what does this hybrid need to look like, and what are we working our way back from? A year later, I don't know if we necessarily expected that we'd be still this far deep into a world living through COVID, but we are. And so the original context for the Futures Forum is just as relevant as ever. The point of what we did last year was a Futures Forum that ran over 2 days. And on the cusp of it was a tools competition that we launched in partnership with Ken Griffin of Citadel and a partnership with Julia Quinn, who's joining us today. We fast forwarded a year and are now doing this as a series, partly to have this as a conversation that will happen over multiple weeks, each with a different theme. The theme this week being accelerated learning. But we've also been able to benefit from having some incredible partners join our effort. And so we now, last year we ran a tools competition effort that had about $1.5 million in prize dollars, because of, the generous support of the Overdeck Family Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, Citadel, as well as the Gates Foundation. We've now, and the Siegel Family Endowment, will have $4 million in prize awards for this year. And so just an incredible set of supporters. And we're going to actually have, folks who are supporting this, George specifically will be joining us and moderating this conversation that'll happen later. So part of, I think, what we're hoping to do in these conversations is to really push our keynote speaker as well as the panelists on what are we actually trying to do? What actually needs to happen to actually support kids in this environment? And so I hope you both use this as an opportunity to both listen for the incredible work that's happening, but also to, listen for what's missing. Because our hope is through the course of this series is to have incredible ideas come out, and then for those ideas, for folks to step forward and apply with those ideas at the end of the month. The deadline for first round applications, which will be pretty short, will be on October 1. And to support that, we'll actually be doing a session right after this, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern time, for folks who want to stick around for 30 minutes. There'll be a Q&A where the learning agency team will be able to answer any questions associated with the competition. So I'm incredibly thrilled to have this amazing group here. And let me, pass it to Julia Quinn, our co-moderator, to also do some welcoming comments and then to key up our keynote. Julia.
Thank you, Kumar. And I will keep this very brief, but as Kumar said, this is an opportunity for us to collectively reflect on pressing issues in education and try to surface promising ideas, both for the tools competition and for moving the field forward more broadly. And we are, for this competition, really looking for ideas that are engineered for continuous improvement and rapid experimentation, so that the ideas themselves will improve over time, and we can push the broader learning engineering field towards better outcomes for students birth through adulthood. We are, I work for Ken Griffin at Citadel. We are thrilled to be a co-sponsor of the competition again this year, and are grateful to all of you for sharing some time with us today and hopefully applying to the competition in a couple weeks. As Kumar mentioned, the session is being recorded, and we're hoping that folks will stick around at the end for some informal networking. And in the meantime, I will turn it over to Ashish Darwan, the founder and CEO of the Central Square Foundation. We're thrilled he can join us today. I'll turn it over to him, and then I will have to pop off briefly, but we'll be back on to join you later on.
Ashish, welcome to the stage, and thank you for all the leadership that you're providing on this topic in India. It's a real inspiration.
No, thank you for inviting me. Let me just start with how challenging it's been over the last 18 months or so. I think many of you know India has the largest school education system in the world. 250 million kids go to school. 125 million are in primary school, first through fifth grade. And already, even before the pandemic hit us, 70% of kids are falling behind, about 85% of kids by fifth grade are at least 2 grades more behind. So the pandemic only made it worse, and by some estimates, lost another year in terms of learning levels over this period of time. So really, the question in front of us is, at this scale and given where we are, how do we sort of catch up? What can we do? The silver lining is that a number of things have happened during this COVID period that allow us to be extremely additive to what's going to happen as schools start to reopen. In India, unlike some parts of the Western world, schools haven't completely reopened as yet. Firstly, I think, at least in the developing world, the child, and remember that even though smartphones are becoming more ubiquitous, and in India now, WhatsApp usage extends to about 60% of households in rural India and 90+% in urban India. The good news is that's going to get to 90% in rural India in the next 3 years. And so the device is going to become more ubiquitous, but we still have lots of challenges in terms of the fact that there's often only one device in the home. It's with the father. It's not necessarily accessible to the student, etc. I think during the COVID period, at least, parents have understood that there is, apart from just entertainment and gaming, the device actually can be used for learning. And so we need to capitalize on that going forward. So some of the opportunities I see are, as we get up and running, is firstly to integrate EdTech much more strongly into the curriculum and ensure, because there's a catch up really over the next 6 to 12 months. And so how do we use EdTech to help accelerate the catch up, the remediation going forward? And I think one way to do that is whatever kids are doing in school, to have EdTech be sort of additive, help children reinforce the learning, because children will be on an accelerated journey over the next 6 to 12 months. And so I think thinking of it in terms of linking it much more tightly to the curriculum is very important. Getting the teachers on board is critical. We have spent a lot of time developing TPD online TPD over the last 2 years. In fact, through our partners at CSF, we have about 75 MOOCs developed for teachers. About 2 million teachers have gone through these in India over the last 12 to 18 months. But I think really beyond TPD is trying to see how we can integrate much more tightly so that teachers are part of whatever home learning program we persist with going forward. We've been trying to educate the government as well that home learning needs to continue over the next 12 months as well, where it's additive to what's happening in schools. I think tools in terms of accelerated learning in elementary school are very, very critical, given that foundational learning is so important and we've fallen behind. And, the learning poverty goals defined by the World Bank, or even, the overall goals defined by the United Nations, UNESCO, I think it's the SDG goals. It's extremely important that we focus on foundational learning and we develop more tools to accelerate learning in elementary school. I think assessment, tools around rapid cycle assessment that can feed back to the teachers and parents, I think going to be really critical. Low cost, formative, easy to use, where it's easy to use the data, I think going to be very, very critical. We've had the
Last John.
Ashish, I think we lost your audio.
etc.
Ashish, we lost your audio.
Sorry.
We lost your audio for just.
Can you hear me
seconds.
now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just reiterating that during this COVID period, one opportunity that's popped up is a much tighter engagement with parents. The state system has developed a sort of parent registry, as it were, a database of mobile numbers linked to the grades their kids are in, and I think being able to leverage that going forward is very critical. Maintaining engagement with parents is really important. And then being sensitive to the fact that children, from a socio-emotional learning standpoint, there's lots that needs to be done. And I think our tools need to take that into account. I would also encourage folks to look at, how you can ride on, products that are already ubiquitous and are used on a daily basis by parents, particularly in the developing world. And I think in the Indian context, in much of the developing world, actually WhatsApp is that medium. Parents on it, 10, 20, 30 times a day. And we found that the products that integrate into WhatsApp and can integrate the teacher as well, so it appears as if the teacher is sending out the content, although it may be sent by a centralized number. The response rates are very, very high on behalf of parents. So, just finding low-tech ways to reach out to parents, but also media that the parents, or tools that the parents use on a high-frequency basis, very, very critical, particularly for kids in the early grades. In India, we're also seeing a strong demand for tools around the school-to-work transition. There's obviously been a lot of job loss during this period. Fewer kids are looking to go to college. I think it's really critical that we find them pathways into the workforce, whether it's career awareness, and tools can do that, or training, or even connecting them with jobs, blue-collar jobs in the workplace. We're seeing many more such tools emerge, but there's room for even more. So I think that this is a critical juncture. This period over the last 18 months, new habits have been formed. Parents have been engaged. I think the teachers have become more savvy. And it's now the smartphone is viewed as a learning device as well. And so I'm really excited that we have so many folks who are participating in this competition, looking to develop tools. I think this learning engineering tool competition could not have come at a more important juncture, because really over the next 12 to 24 months, it's critical that EdTech can play a truly additive and transformational role in getting our children to catch up. And there's lots of good solutions that have emerged, but many more can emerge in the coming months. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to answer questions offline. People can reach me, and we'd be delighted at Central Square Foundation to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. One quick question I had for you is just, you all have been huge proponents of thinking really hard about how to build, high quality applications in India. If anybody is listening and they're based in the US or they're based somewhere else, but would love to build tools that could have an application in India, are there a couple of words of advice or ways they sort of could engage with your team?
Yeah, so I would say that definitely engage with our team. We're very interested in working with folks from anywhere in the world. Two is, I would say, we want to reach the bottom half. And so that means imagining that folks will be, that what app it is needs to be light. I would say more than apps, think of integrating into WhatsApp would be my advice. And I think look at ways, I know it's hard for international folks to do it in terms of integrating the curriculum, but I think on the data side, just being mindful of the fact that teachers and parents are still, at a very rudimentary level. And so keeping it really simple. So it's visual is going to be very critical to succeed in the developing world.
Well, thank you so much. With that, let me pass it to Julia, who I think is going to introduce our panel. Would be that Julia disappeared for a second. So I'm going to take this as liberty to introduce our fearless partners and invite George onto the stage, who's going to be moderating the panel.
Thanks, Kumar. Thrilled to be co-sponsor for the competition and excited about the panel we have. I'm going to return to a question you opened us up with, Kumar. How can we best support kids in this environment? Because as I was, I have the joy of walking my kids to the local public school here in Brooklyn. They go to PS 58, which is around the corner. And last week was the first week of school. And, I'm having conversations with many parents who I haven't seen since March 2020, right? And having conversations with teachers in the schoolyard and principals and school administrators and even the crossing guard. And if there's like an underlying question that is like the theme of everything, it's how you open this up. I mean, there's this what are we doing here, right? And then there's the my God, the kids have been through so much. How can we create an environment that best supports them? And I think that is the crux of all the conversations that are coming up. And parents are concerned about this. Teachers are concerned about this. Administrators are concerned about this. And even the crossing guard, I can assure you, on Court Street and the intersection of Court and 4th Street, right outside PS 58, is concerned about this. So I thought I would start by just talking just very briefly about the opportunity, right? Behind every challenge is an opportunity, and it's no surprise that the pandemic, we're really navigating enduring changes to our educational system. There are learning gaps. There's a range in the level of academic performance that's only widened over the pandemic, making it harder for teachers to meet the needs of all their students. There's learning loss, and with that comes the need to differentiate content, to personalize instruction. And that, to be clear, that was always a challenge pre-COVID, but COVID has only disproportionately exacerbated these issues. And while there are many factors that hold students back from reaching their full potential, at Overdeck, we believe in making a bet that leveraging technology, for many of the reasons Ashish highlighted earlier, is really going to be key to addressing that. And just a few things we're seeing in sort of the unique features and of technology and what works, what ed tech products work. One is the products that really integrate into everyday learning and teaching. That seamless integration. Ashish mentioned WhatsApp. I mean, WhatsApp is like the tool internationally. Like anything that can integrate to existing tools is really important. Optimizing for hybrid usage. We're living in this world where schools are opening and closing and reopening and closing, and kids are going to be at home. And then leveraging and engaging parents and teachers. Ashish mentioned this point. I mean, as parents, we've over the last 18 months, I've had a window into my kids' education that I never had before. And my expectation is that I want to maintain that. So tools that like connect me to their classroom are really important. So that's just a large framing around the technology, the opportunity, but I'd really like to begin by asking our two other panelists, Chris and Nafisa, to please introduce themselves and speak a bit about their organizations. So Nafisa, or I see you both now on the screen. So Nafisa, I'll hand it over to you for a brief introduction.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Nafisa Owens here. I'm the Assistant Director for STEM Education at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And my background is for several years, I have worked at the National Science Foundation as a program officer, and most recently as a senior advisor supporting its Directorate of Education and Human Resources, but most recently have gone to the White House to support our education and workforce efforts. So pleasure to be here, and I will hand it back to you, George.
Yeah, I think George, I wanted me to introduce
hand it over to Chris. Yeah,
great. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so hey, Chris Minnick, I'm the CEO of NWEA. We're a national and international nonprofit that assesses students and also does research based on that data. You may have seen our learning research that showed kids not growing quite as quickly during the pandemic. That was out most recently about 2 or 3 months ago. I think prior to NWA, I worked at the Council of Chief State School Officers, where I was the executive director there. That was an organization that represents the state superintendent's education. And I had the honor of leading the development of the Common Core Standards, which you may have heard of, although we don't talk about them anymore because they are named other things in states. So that was things I've done in my past. So looking forward to the conversation, George. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Nafisa. I thought I'd start. I'm sure we have a number of participants on the call who are thinking of applying for the tools competition, or have already started the application. And I'm curious, from where each of you sit, what advice do you have for teams that are aiming to sort of thinking about tools to accelerate math and literacy?
Nafisa, would you like to go first? Or me
to? Please go ahead. I'll go.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is what schools are looking for right now is not another technology thing that takes a long time to set up. And what we have seen in schools is the stuff that's working the best for us are things that are quick. They are easy to use with parents, because most of the or much of the interaction now is going on with parents. And then we're also noticing a higher expectation from parents about communication. Unfortunately or fortunately, this is a positive and a negative. I'm getting notes someone was joking with me yesterday that they need to quit their job to just read all the emails they're getting from their school right now. And I think the increased communication means that the technology has to be easy to use. It almost doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't even have to be research based. If it's easy to use, schools are hooking onto it. So what I would say is the trick is going to be to really focus on UX and make sure the experience is good, and then back it with research so that we have something that's good for kids. Unfortunately, we see a lot of the districts we work with are using stuff that isn't backed in research and has mastered that UX piece. But then we've got not necessarily the learning taking place, and we have evidence that that's what's going on. So I guess I would start with UX and then back into making sure that it is actually creating the progress we want for students on literacy and math. That would be my advice.
Yes, I feel like you overheard a conversation I had this morning with my wife where it was the exact thing. We're bombarded. There's so much noise out there. There's so many tools and there's so many things coming at us. And I just I go for the lowest hanging fruit of well, is it easy to integrate? I don't want to sign on to something else. I don't want another friction point to adoption. And I think as a parent, we've become really sensitive to those friction points.
That's right. And, it's not, I think it's actually on our industry to figure out how to work together better for parents. So, we're a national nonprofit, so but we operate more in a for-profit space. Like most of the people we compete against are for-profit organizations. So there is a lot of interest in sort of keeping us out of some of these conversations. At least we run into that some. So I do wonder if there's what the universal sign-in will be for parents, or what's the connection point. I think that's something that the smart technologists on this call could figure out. We had a moment where things like Clever and OneRoster became the rostering solutions for the country. Will we have a moment where there's a parent portal that emerges that becomes that? I don't know, but it could be an interesting tool. So,
Nafisa?
Yeah, so there's research to show that supporting the use of technology is critically important, and I will say but not forgetting how important the level of engagement is in all aspects. So as mentioned earlier, the device that is being used and tailoring that technology to the device of the community that it's looking to serve. Also, how it's being delivered and how teachers are connected to it, and parents. So, as been discussed before, how parents have access and kind of not constant, but accessible access, so that they have a way of getting that information when they need it, and also being able to understand what that information is telling them so they can take next steps, and identifying where those worry points are so that they can then identify the right support system that they need to be in touch with, whether it be the teacher to work with them to understand how they can support that student moving forward. I think that connection between school and home, and likewise, so much of what I think we are talking about and thinking about is the whole student within a whole STEM ecosystem. So not just what's going on in the school, but how are we connecting this to those activities that are out of school, after school, and how can we connect those? So if a student needs reinforcement or opportunities to engage with technology after school, what does that look like? Who is the community that is serving them? What is the community environment that they're in that can provide the support that they need? And then I would just, quickly mention too, we've been talking a lot about social emotional learning and support, and just taking in consideration how that engagement plays in. So we've definitely seen in these virtual environments how students can disengage. And so we need to make sure that we're able to tell, we're able to identify when a student, maybe the screen is on, maybe the technology is there, but they're not truly engaged and they're not necessarily learning, even though they're following the steps. So the way to assess not just maybe by the teacher and the use of the technology, but also a way for the technology to give those, critical at that time, at that moment, feedback to teachers and parents about its work. So I think those are the things that I will just quickly mention when I'm thinking about, some of the things that folks here on the line might want to consider as they're thinking about the technology that would really serve the students and the communities within.
We've talked generally about the impact of COVID, and I'd be curious to hear, maybe Nafisa, I'll start with you this time. What are some of the barriers to students face as they're, like my kids, re-entering the school year, many of whom haven't been into a classroom, since March of 2020?
Yeah, so I think the Department of Education has done a great job outlining some of the barriers that students have faced, particularly those who have been in and are in historically marginalized communities. I think, particularly those barriers that we just have to be mindful of, cognizant of, are the ones that ensure that they have, the support that they need for issues with food security, and making sure that they're in a safe and inclusive learning environment, making sure that they have the support that they need within the classroom and outside of the classroom, those basic needs. But then in addition, outside of that, I think, again, we need to look at what are the equity issues that we're facing, how we can ensure that what we're providing is serving those who need it most. And so making sure people have access, not just the technology, but also making sure that what they have access to is available to them when they need it, wherever they are. Making sure that they have the broadband support to support whatever technology that they might be looking to use. And also making sure they have, again, the support systems that they need. Technology in itself will not solve problems if the student cannot kind of work their way through it, or they have to do this independently. And when they get stuck, they don't have the support that they need. So making sure that we are leveling the playing field and that we're providing the supports for those who need it most, technology for those who need it most, I think is one of the things that COVID has shown us, that those who have less are not able to kind of get through those gaps, and we have to address them and level the playing field.
I think that's a really good answer, and the only thing I would add to it, because I would say I push on a lot of points Nafisa made, but the thing I would add is I just watched my fourth grader go to school, and so a kid walked by the other day, and he was like, I know that kid, but I forgot how to talk to people I don't know. Like, I mean, I watched it happen. Like, it was like he was like, I want to play with this kid, but I don't even know how to start a conversation with him. I mean, and my kid is not antisocial in any sort of way. He's very outgoing, but it was fascinating for me to watch. And so how could we encourage interaction through technology, not the interaction with the device, but actually person-to-person interaction would be something else I would think about. Is, can we get them off the devices, but using the device to spur some action would be something I would be thinking about if I was developing a tool in this competition. So thanks.
Nafisa, I'm going to follow up. I'm seeing one of the questions on the chat that's directly related to something you were talking about. Can you provide some examples of promising technology innovations that really help address this equity issue?
Yeah, so I will not mention specifics, but I do think that there are, federal resources out there, and I don't actually have access to the chat myself, but can definitely share this with Kumar and others who can spread them as far as some of the resources that are out there. So I will say, the Department of Education has provided a resource that has indicated some of the strategies that are out there to support acceleration of learning. And so within that document, there are, highlights of technologies and practices that are out there that folks could look to. But then also the Department of Education has created a new site. I don't know exactly when it was posted, but the Best Practices Clearinghouse, which is another way that there are resources for folks to get to know about innovations that are currently in play and opportunities to kind of see where those innovations could be perhaps further developed, further implemented, integrated into communities that don't have them currently.
And Chris, picking up on this sort of, I know that NWEA released earlier this summer some research, and I'd love to hear from you if you could share more about sort of what the research has indicated around the level or the current state of learning loss, especially for low-income students and students of color.
Yeah, it technically doesn't show up as loss. What it shows up as is a lack of growth. And so we aren't seeing kids sort of going backwards in their learning, but in the continuum of mathematics and literacy learning, we see across the board. So regardless of background, for the past year, kids have not grown at the same speed they had been growing at in the past. Now, that's not a reason for panic or anything like that, but it is a reason to focus on acceleration and making sure that we pick up the learning. What I'm most worried about actually is the K-3 students, because if we sort of pass those students along without getting some of the foundations of reading and some basics of numeracy, we will pick up this problem in 5th and 6th grade. That's where we're going to see it. And so my hope is that we will see some real dedication in those grades to making sure we're picking up some of the things we would have assessed for in earlier grades, or that we have a process in which 3rd grade teachers can really look at what 2nd grade should have looked like. Because that's like it or not, I'd love to get rid of grades, but most of the stuff that is taught in early grades is only taught in one of those grades. So some of the basics around fractions come in 2nd grade and a little bit in 3rd grade, and like that stuff is so important to knowledge and later in schooling. And so algebra is based on some of those things. So I do worry that the lack of growth that we've seen in the past year will persist in future years. Now, I would just say, you asked directly about low-income students and also students of color, and we do see gaps between between that performance. So it is affecting our students of color much more than students who have had more resources traditionally. So I guess I would say, yes, that we need to care about those differences, but we also need to understand that this has affected all of our kids. And so making sure we attend to some of the challenges that our students of color are going to have as part of this is really important. It is an absolute equity issue that we have to attend to, but it also doesn't mean we can't forget about all of our students at the same time. So it's a complicated situation. And frankly, when you're going into a school building right now, but we aren't going into school buildings right now because you can't, but when kids are going in school buildings, the part of it is just so focused on safety that academics have taken a back stance in some of these conversations. And we have to be so clear that we're not blaming teachers for what has happened here. That we're not saying that the teaching and learning was the problem. It wasn't. We just didn't have access to students. So the messaging has to be very carefully crafted as we go forward with this, because we don't want technology to be the solution and the teachers to be the problem. Like that could be where we end up if we're not careful.
It's interesting. You spoke earlier, Chris, about your son meeting somebody in the street and really wanting to have a conversation, but it's almost like they were muscles that he's forgotten how to exercise through like 18 months of Zoom. And it makes me, I've had some conversations with grantees who are often sort of like either on the SEL side of the equation or on the academic side of the equation, and they see it almost as like the folks in the SEL are afraid that when we return to school, that like SEL will take a back burner because there's going to be so much emphasis on catching up in reading and writing and math and literacy, and the social emotional becomes like a nice to have, but like school is the time to catch up on that. How would you sort of, either of you, like address some of those concerns?
Yeah, I'll hop in, and Nafisa, please add. I think the first thing is I've noticed school systems very focused on SEL. So I will just say, at least in my experience, the schools are leading with SEL, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that should continue. I do worry about some of the academic stuff, as I talked about, and especially in the elementary school grades, because I think you could you absolutely have to lead with SEL, but there are some real early reading issues that will take place if we don't get kids comfortable with certain phonemic awareness by second and third grade. We don't have good systems in this country to catch kids up if they don't have that good basis for reading in third grade. And I mean, you can argue about the policy and all that, but we just don't have good systems in our education system to catch kids up on reading. So I will also, while I do believe SEL is very important, I think schools are picking up on that. At least that's been my experiences. Districts are very focused on making sure kids are welcomed and making sure kids are that they feel like they belong. And we should do more work on that. But we also have to make sure that the academics are attended to as we go. So that's where I am on it. Thanks.
If I can just add too, so definitely the importance of SEL. I would also say, right now, particularly as we are prioritizing math instruction and really trying to just support students as they are coming back into the classrooms. I'm definitely not wanting to forget about the anxiety that exists in math and the support that not only students need as they are kind of facing challenges, if they have any, when it comes to math, but also kind of the parents and again, once again, the support systems that they may have in anxiety that they may have in supporting that student. So, self-efficacy, how students are identifying themselves, relating to the content, making sure it's applicable. They see how it applies to what they're doing outside of the classroom. I think all those things are really important as well, particularly as we're thinking about how we support students in their learning. The other thing I'll just quickly mention too, and maybe this would be helpful for those who are thinking of technologies to consider for this competition, and that is one kind of the universal design of learning and the approach that I would encourage others to think about. But in particular, when thinking about what you're developing, the languages that would be available to the communities that you would serve, are those who you're serving, are they part of that team, and are they engaged in the development and engaged in the conversations that you're having about what you're hoping to then provide to them? What are the images that you're thinking about, and are those images reflective of the communities that you'll serve? And then also, not every difference, not every disability is apparent, is visible. And so thinking of what we don't know, what we don't see, and how we can still reach the needs of students when we don't know all of the details.
I'm going to end with a question. I'm going to come back to something Ashish opened up with, where he talked about the opportunity that COVID's presenting with new habits being formed. So much of where we sit, we see COVID as a big challenge, but the flip side of that challenge is there's, amazing opportunity. We're engaging with, parents are engaged with classrooms and their kids in ways that weren't possible. Technology that was, often, a nice to have is now being integrated in thoughtful ways. So it's like there is a silver lining to the really dark cloud of COVID. Yet, like, how do we prevent ourselves from not reverting back to old habits? You know, there's this sort of, there's a big system in place. Human behavior is complicated, you know, and I can just imagine that, like, if we were reading about COVID in the state of education 5 years from now, like, how do we prevent this from just being a blip where we experimented and then just reverted back to old habits, as opposed to really taking on the change that is being afforded by this challenge?
So first off, I think you got to be really clear about which habits you want to return to. There are some that are actually good habits. So for example, one of the things that I hope we don't go back to is making parents come to parent-teacher conferences at 2:30 when they all have to work every day. Like, you know, I mean, we want to talk about a way to disengage families, is to set these things up at a time that no parent that has a job could go to. And so, you know, we did some things, at least in our schools in the pandemic, where we can now safely assume that you could hop on, you know, a computer and have an interaction with teachers, and frankly, making sure that we get technology to everybody so we can do that in the United States is something that I think is just really important. So I would say, how do we make sure we don't return to some of the bad habits is a really interesting system question, right? So how do you create incentives in funding sources? So I watched a couple states say that you can keep doing what you used to be doing around around some technology implementation, but if you want our state funding, you're going to do these three things as part of your technology implementations. And so being really smart about how we fund schools so that we create behaviors that we want is something that I think is very important post-pandemic. And then the last thing I'd say is, you know, some of these habits, we should be careful not to say we have to throw everything out. So getting kids at the early grades face to face with their teachers in a setting to learn how to read and do mathematics is pretty much best practice around how students learn. And so I don't want to substitute technology for everything that we know is still good in the classroom, but I want to make sure technology pushes us forward, and almost supplements in some of these conversations. So we don't have a replacement conversation unless it's really necessary. We have a supplemental conversation, I think. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, I think just to provide one example here, for those students who have disabilities, you know, I have understood that virtual learning in some cases worked, you know, and so again, the pandemic has brought a silver lining to some strategies that have worked for some students. But again, it hasn't worked for everyone, and so you know, trying to be balanced in what we keep and what we realize that we need to do differently. And oftentimes that realization will come through our ability to collect and assess, which is why the assessments and the evaluations and the data is so important to informing our decisions and informing our work. I would also say, you know, to Chris's point about the incentives, and also, you know, realizing sometimes this is, you know, the path of least resistance. So, you know, what are the barriers that exist? How can we remove them? And also, how can we facilitate what we hope and aim for people to do? How do we reduce the burden so that it's easier for the things that we want and see to be incorporated and used to be done? And then I'll just also mention, you know, really when we're kind of being forward thinking, and that is how do we thinking about sustainability? So in everything that we do, the funds may not always be there in the way that we're expecting them to be. Funds move. And so the things that are working the best, how can we ensure their sustainability long term? And likewise, how can we, thinking, you know, kind of from the beginning, how can we scale the things that are working? how do we see them scaling in the future so that good things prosper and beyond beyond the kind of one community or one classroom. If it's working, how can we increase and support that growth?
Nafisa, Chris, thank you so much for your time participating in the panel. I'm sure there'll be more questions coming on the chat and other sources, but I'm going to hand it over to Kumar for closing remarks and next steps.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you, George, and Chris, and Nafisa for just a ton of insight hidden there, both from the direct work you're doing, but also sort of interacting with the educational system in a lot of ways, and for what I feel like are real ties with what Ashish was talking about, right? Which is obviously COVID, comparing different educational systems around the world are in very different situations, and the learning outcomes that systems are working through and different levels of poverty are very different. But on the other hand, we're also living through this global phenomenon together. And so this whole question of how do we use the phone? How do we use parents? How do we interact? The thing that jumps out to me is, I've been reading a lot about, how did Katrina have a big impact on, the educational system for New Orleans. And it took almost a decade for that system to recover. But one of the things when you read about it is that the grade bands sort of stop making sense. It's like third grade forever, because as the system comes back, it's like, but I don't know some kids have fallen behind, some kids have moved up. And so you're basically asking educators to sort of teach at an even wider range. And you're constantly having to go back and forth. So rather than acceleration, you actually have, you're kind of stuck as to like, what are we actually trying to do? And so I think the role that a tools competition to giving educators, parents, learners themselves much more precision to try to understand where they're at, what are these hidden gaps, as Chris was talking about, and what are ways to keep moving forward, ends up becoming all the more important, because I think just saying, the teachers will figure it out or the parents will figure it out, I think might just be asking a lot in a system that's already under a lot of stress. So I thought that insights were incredibly useful, and I'm super appreciative. Just a few things in addition to my deep thanks. I want to, of course, thank the Learning Agency and a number of folks who helped make today possible. This is, as I had mentioned at the top, is part of a series. We're going to have a next conversation on September 28th. It'll be on the role that tools that specifically support research and accelerated testing and ideas of what works and for what students can play. And so that'll be our final panel conversation in this series. And just as another reminder, the goal really is that, whether you or your broader network, folks to apply to the tools competition. And just after this, we're going to be having a session just at 1 p.m. Eastern time that will be a Q&A session. We've had pretty strong participation in the previous two that we've run, and lots of, no question is too small or too big around how the tool competition runs and what the first phase is, and getting both advice on different things that people are putting together, as well as, the Learning Agency team has been adding their contact information along in the chat if folks want to reach out directly. And then, I think the other thing I'll just sort of mention is that, we are sort of eager to continue to get your ideas for additional ways we can be helping support this community. Obviously we're not at the beginning of this, but we're also not at the end of it. And so we'll, of course, welcome your continued feedback in all of this. And just wanted to thank everybody for all the work that they're doing, both our panelists. This has been an incredible challenge that we continue to live through. And so I'm deeply appreciative of all the expertise that was shared in the chat. And we're looking forward to having all of you involved in the days ahead. So with that, let me pass it to Meg Brenner, who will lead our follow-on conversation. And let me again thank our panelists for their contributions.
Great, thanks so much, Kumar. And thanks for everyone who joined. We'll give everyone a second to transition off if they are unable to join for the next portion of our event. We are really thrilled for all of the insights that all the speakers in this session shared on possible ideas for competitive proposals for the tools competition. And the next 30 minutes is an opportunity to give a really brief overview of the competition itself and reserve the majority of time for questions, as well as most of the time for just an opportunity to meet other people who are interested and have the chance to get some peer feedback, as well as hopefully exchange some contact information to have more partnerships along the way. I think one of the reasons that we are thrilled to bring so many people together on the overall events, but also this networking opportunity, is obviously competitions have to name winners, but the real goal of the competition itself is to support everyone who is doing exciting work in this space and to provide as many partnerships and resources to advance the work of everyone. So, the competition itself is specifically designed to be really inclusive. And so there are two prize bands for the competition, as many of you already know, in order for people to share their idea and be competitive, even if they're someone who's just trying to get an idea off the ground and is really new to the field, all the way up to people who have an established platform and looking to tweak or change it in order to be more, to add more and respond more to the time. So there are 4 specific tracks or priority areas of the competition. We ask that everyone really do their best to select one of those tracks and make their proposal really clear on which track they're going after. And as a result, it will be far more competitive. If people have questions about those, let us know. And then just to note, there are kind of a number of different criteria that we're looking for. I think all of them are, there's more information about them online, but the one I really do want to mention and talk about now is the emphasis on learning engineering, which, as Kumar mentioned at the top of the call, is we're really looking for tools that are designed for continuous improvement and rapid experimentation. And what that means is, the tools itself should continue to use their own data and continue to iterate within their own platform. But we're also looking for tools that are really eager to continue to share data and insights with the field. And so the benefits and the data and the insights that are collected from the specific tool can also be shared to improve learning science for the general community and other platforms. So, with that, I would love to open it up for, one other thing. A quick thing on the process of the competition. We are really close to the deadline for phase 1. The first deadline is on October 1st. It is a week and a half away. And I want to stress that the first proposal that is due is a really light lift. So for those of you who may be on the phone thinking, wow, this is interesting, but I just have heard about it now and I don't have time, I highly encourage you to take a look at the form itself, which we'll drop in the chat, because it's equivalent to about 1 to 1.5 pages. And likely, if you're already thinking about it, you can kind of dump what you have in your mind or copy what you already have from existing proposals, and it will suffice. So before you dismiss the opportunity because you think you don't have time, please take a look at what's actually required. The second phase is due in December. And the reason for that is we really want to make sure that everyone gets feedback from us and resources as they continue to build their idea and build their team so that there's we ask for progressively more to make sure you're a fit for the competition before you kind of build out the proposal even more. So The winners are named in late spring. And so, for more on the actual process, happy to answer more questions. And there's also more on the website.